Please take note that today's shiur begins at the bottom of Daf Lamed Ches Omid Beis at the Mishnah. The topic heading that you see on the side of the Gemara, the Nosei, we indicate that this will keep us till Daf Mem Aleph Omid Beis, the topic being Bikur Cholim, the mitzvah of visiting the sick. The Mishnah, Hamuder Hano Mechavero, V'nichnas levakroi. A person who has forsworn granting benefit to his friend and goes to visit him in Bikur Cholim, in the context of visiting the sick, Omeid Avolo Yoshev. He is required to remain standing and not sit down. Umarpei Refuas Nefesh Avoloi Refuas Momon. This is an expression that the Gemara will explain later on. We continue at the top of Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. B'mai askinon. Our Mishnah mentioned that when going in to visit this sick person, standing is allowed, but sitting is not. Again, we're dealing with a mudar hana. So what are the circumstances? B'shenichse mevaker asurim al choyle. If the case is that the properties of the visitor are forbidden to the sick individual, afilu yoshev nami, there should be permission for coming in and sitting as well. The only prohibition as far as the vow is concerned is that the sick man should not benefit from the property, from the possessions of the visitor. But the visitor can benefit from the possessions of the sick individual. So let the visitor come in and sit down and enjoy the chair of the choyle, of the sick man. If it is such that the properties of the choyle, of the sick man, are prohibited to the visitor, then we should not allow the visitor to come in and even stand there. The Meforshim explain that by merely walking onto the sick man's property, the term used is drisas haregel, the mere right to walk upon his property is considered a certain level of benefit to the visitor, and the visitor, if these are the circumstances, is not allowed to benefit from the property of the choyle. So he can't even go in and visit the sick man and stand there. The diamonds that you see are explained on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading. These are Deos b'nichsemi asurim almi. Opinions in dealing with this issue, whose property is prohibited upon whom. K'dei lahasbir chiluk hamishna bein oimed shemuter v'yoshev she'oser. We first have to set up the circumstances in order to then understand the distinction the Mishnah made between standing, which is allowed, and going in and sitting down, which is not allowed. So the Gemara continues. Omar Shmuel, li'olam b'shenichsei mevaker asurin al hachoyle. It's the property of the visitor that is prohibited for the sick man to benefit from. If that's the case, why can't the visitor go in and sit down to visit the sick man? The only prohibition by way of the vow is that the property of the visitor is also on the sick man, but the sick man's property, his chairs, his other utensils, they're not also on the visitor. So why can't the visitor come in and sit down? Approach number one is uvemakin shenoitlim schar al hayeshiva v'ein noitlim schar al ho'amida. We said that the nichsei mevaker is Ozer. We're talking here about a place that a fee is paid for those who visit the sick and sit down. The visitor sits down with the ailing individual. He gets a fee for that. So what our Mishnah is telling us is that the visitor in a place like that where a fee is paid shall not go and visit the sick man gratis. He shouldn't go in and visit him for free. If he does, so then the sick man is saving money he would have had to pay and would have had to pay to the mevaker, to the visitor. And the nichsei mevaker is actually also to the sick man. So the sick man cannot enjoy a free visit because he's thereby saving the money that he would have had to pay the mevaker. And as we said, it's the property of the mevaker is also to the sick man. We at the same time are saying that payment is made for coming in for visits while sitting, no payment made for visitors that come and merely stand. My Pascha, the Gemara asks, how can you be so sure that for this a fee is paid and for this a no fee is paid? The Gemara explains, the point of our Mishnah is to tell us the following. The af b'mokim shenoit l'schar, even in a place where a fee is paid, al hayeshiva boy lemishkal, al amida lo boy lemishkal. He is entitled to take a fee only if he goes in and sits, not if he merely goes in and stands by the sick man. V'i boy asema, another approach is that of Rabbi Shimon, or like Rabbi Shimon ben Eliyakim. In order to appreciate what the Gemara is doing right now, we glance across in the Rashi, V'boy seima li'olam b'shenichsei mevaker asurim al hachoila v'afilu b'mokim she'ein noit limschar al hayeshiva. We're talking about, as we said before, the nichsei mevaker is also to the choila. The visitor's property is also to the sick man. If that's the case, and here we're also adding, based on the Rashi we just read, that we're talking about a place where no fees are paid even for sitting. So then why can't the mevaker go in and sit in the chair of the choila and do the mitzvah that way? Why does the Mishnah say not to sit? So the answer to that is based on Reb Shimon ben Eliyakim's teaching, and we continue in the Gemara. Gzeira shemo yishe b'amida. Reb Shimon ben Eliyakim says in a totally different context that we are fear-struck or fearful that a person might remain standing. Hacha nami, here in our case, we don't want the mevaker to go in and sit down because gzeira shemo yishe b'yeshiva, he might stay there longer than is necessary. And here we again look at Rashi. Shemo yishe ba'amida, hachanami shemo yishe b'yeshiva. Ushia, the yeshiva, the continued sitting there with the chayla, vadai hanohi l'chayla. It's definitely something that the chayla will enjoy, will benefit from. Ulachi lo yeshiv imo, and therefore don't sit there. Again, why? Because you might extend your stay with the chayla, and that will definitely be a problem of giving the chayla hano. And as we said, we're talking about a case where we are dealing with a mudar hano, and also, of course, where the nichsei mevaker is also to the chayla. Before going further in the Gemara, let us also look at the Rosh's commentary on this last approach. The Rosh, like we said before, the property of the visitor is that which is prohibited to the chayla. The ein noitlin schar lo al hayeshiva velo al ha'amida, and no fees are paid whatsoever Ve'im yisha b'yeshiva, we're afraid that if he sits down and then remains beyond the minimum amount of time, he delays there. Iko hano meruba l'chayla. There's a lot of hano, of pleasure, enjoyed by the sick person. V'tzorech litain schar l'mishi yisha etzlo kol kach. And that situation, this shihiyah b'yeshiva, delayed, continued sitting, that would ordinarily require pay. One should be paid for that. And therefore, our Mishnah is saying, don't come in and sit, as we said before, to do all of this for nothing, for no pay, because eventually if he stays there a long time, that is something that certainly should be paid for, and if you're going to do it for nothing, so the mavaker is in fact granting a benefit and pleasure to the chayla, contrary to the vow. Now for a different approach. Ula omar le'olam b'shich sechela asurim al hamavaker, where the property of the infirmed individual is prohibited to be enjoyed by the visitor. Then why is the visitor allowed to go in and stand there? Isn't there the problem that the visitor is going to be nehene b'drisas haregel from the property of the chayla, contrary to the vow? Ukegoin delo adre min chiyusei. And the circumstances of the neder, when the chayla made his property Ozer on the mavaker, one thing is for sure, the chayla did not make a vow that would interfere with his own well-being. That's the lo ahadri min chiyusei. Min chiyusei means from his life. He wouldn't compromise any aspect of his own life in making the vow. If that's the case, then the sick man, it's true he made a vow, but not a vow that would exclude or preclude the visitor from coming in and visiting the sick. The Meforshim point out here, based on the Gemara later on, that he who visits the sick, actually, there is an actual therapeutic value in that visit. And therefore a person would never make a vow in which he's compromising his own physical well-being. Well, if that's the case, that the nichsei chayla are Ozer, and the reason he's allowed to go in and stand is because the neder was never said against the other parties coming and visiting him. The Gemara asks, well, afilu yoshev nami. If you're saying lo adrse min chiyusei, a person's vow would not compromise his own well-being, so why can't the mavakir go in and sit as well? And yet the Mishnah says not to sit. The Gemara answers, if you want to know why not to sit, efshir ba'amida, whatever was supposed to be accomplished through the sitting can be accomplished through the standing. And therefore, as the Mishnah said, in the Mudar Hano situation, the Mavakir goes and stands, but does not sit. Meisvei, Chola hu nichnas levakroi. If the initiator of the vow, the Madir, took ill, so the Mudar can go and visit. Chola benoi, shoyalo bashuk. If the son of the Madir took ill, so then the Mudar cannot go to visit, but can ask about his welfare outside. Bishlama le'ula, diomar b'shenichsei choyle asurim al hamavaker, ukegoin delo adre min chiyusei, shapir. This source will work out according to Ula's approach, where the property of the choyle essentially is prohibited, and therefore
the mudar, technically speaking, should not be going to visit, because he is not to have benefit from the properties of the ill individual. However, as we said before, that when one makes a neder, he's not going to include something that is self-inflicting of detriment. In other words, the choyle needs someone to visit him. The Gemara will elaborate on that idea a little later. So, therefore, even though, as we said, technically speaking, the property of the sick individual, in this case, is prohibited, it's not going to be enforced, because that would work to his own detriment. So the neder never was said concerning that. However, the property of that chola, nevertheless, is usher to the mevaker with regard to the son of the chola. You'll notice there's a Rashi, about 8 lines from the bottom. Chola benoi shelmadir, mudo shelo b'shuk al iske beno shapir, hainu deshoni bein hu livno. Dilu b'shechola hu, when the madir himself takes ill, mutu likones l'sham, the mudar is allowed to go into holo adre min chiyuse. The vow wasn't going to be self-inflicting. Avol kishechola benoi, Eino nichnas levakud haleko chiyusa demadir. His own life isn't in question. It's the life, the welfare of his son. So the neder doesn't cover that, and therefore the mudar cannot go and visit. Now we go back to the Gemara. Elo l'Shmuel diomar b'shenichse mevakir asurim al hachoyle. But according to Shmuel, that says that we are in the Mishnah, which made a distinction between Yoshev and Omeid. We're talking about a case of the property of the visitor is usher on the ill individual. Why in this Tanaic source is a distinction made between the sick person himself and the son of the sick person? That with regard to the sick person, we're allowing the visitor to come, and with regard to the son of the sick person, the visitor cannot come. After all, we're not dealing with the property of the visitor. Omar loch. So Shmuel would answer you. Masnisen, the Mishnah, is b'shenichse mevaker asurim al hachoyle, as Shmuel had explained 4 lines from the top. Braisa, the case of this Tanaic source, involving the son of the choyle, is in fact b'shenichse choyle asurim al hamevaker. In other words, it's where the isur is in the opposite direction. So since we're talking in the Braisa, as we explained before, where it's the nichse choyle that are usher, the mevaker, nevertheless, the visitor is nevertheless allowed to come in, because the neder that the choyle made would never have covered his own welfare. The Gemara asks, that sounds kind of arbitrary. My Pascha, who is to say that the Mishnah is speaking about that circumstance and the Braisa is talking about this circumstance? Omar Rova. Shmuel, the Gemara continues at the top of Omid Beis. Masnisin Kishisei. The text of the Mishnah proposed what otherwise would have been a difficulty that forces Shmuel to set up the Mishnah that way, that it's nichse mevaker are asurim. My irya detoni oimeid avolo yoshev. Why did the Mishnah make that distinction, that the visitor is allowed only to stand and not to sit? Shma mino the nichse mevaker asurim al hachoyle. It's because of that reason that the nichse mevaker are usher, and as Shmuel explained before, that payment is made for sitting, but not for standing. And if we make that distinction, then we understand that the Mevakir who would be visiting for nothing will be benefiting the Chayla with the fee that he would have otherwise had to pay. And of course, there was another answer the Gemara gave, the Gzera Shema Isha. As you can see, there's a slash mark that indicates that which follows is a new trend of thought. We're staying within the general topic of Bikur Cholim, but a new trend of thought. On the side, we have a topic heading, which reads, Remez LeBikur Cholim Min HaTorah Minayin. Where do you see in the Psukim a reference to the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim? Omar Reish Lakish, Remez LeBikur Cholim Min HaTorah Minayin. The Rosh, on the lower part of the page, the last narrow line, Remez Lebikur Cholim Min HaTorah Pirush Remez Mefurash, something explicit. The Hod Darshin on Lei Miyel Chuba. There's a pasuk in Shmos Perek Yitches pasuk Chof, from which we say that this is an allusion to Bikur Cholim Eino Mefurash. It's not explicit, so that we're looking for something more explicit in the psukim, referring to Bikur Cholim. And we answer, Shenemar, the Gemara continues 4 lines from the top. Pasuk appears in Parshas Korach. Korach was the individual who led a insurrection or a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu announced regarding these people, this band of dissenters, Im kamois kol ha'adam yemusun eileh. If these people end up dying a normal death, ufkudas kol adam yipoked alehem lo Hashem shlochani. And now this phrase of kudas kol adam is going to be of significance for us. Lumar asks, my mashma, how do you see in this pasuk anything to do with Bikur Cholim? Omar Rava. Rava explains, in kemois kol ha'adam yemusun eileh. If these people end up dying a normal death, what's normal? Normally before death, say a normal or the natural type death is preceded by illness. Who are people who are ill, muton v'risasan, lying in their beds, and uvnei adam mevakr noisam. Now notice that's what we dashed, underlined, and that's what the expression of kudas kol adam yipoked alehem, when people are sick before their death, others are visiting them. That's Bikur Cholim. What would people say? Then, if that is the fate that would befall the Bnei Korach, that they leave this world normally, Lo Hashem Shlochani Lozeh, then their claim must have been correct, and then Moshe Rabbeinu, was not sent to be the leader and appoint the other individuals to leadership, which is of course what Korach was rebelling against. So, without dwelling on the whole Moshe Rabbeinu Korach story, you see that part of the life experience is that when people are ill, others go to visit them. You notice that we have a long bracketed section. The note by the star on the side of the Gemara says, Achrei HaSograyim HaGemara Mamshicha B'inyonei Bikur Cholim. After the brackets, the Gemara resumes a discussion concerning Bikur Cholim. We have a diamond marking that is explained on the side where you notice the mivneh. They are shtei droshes shel Rava, 2 teachings of Rava. Now, the reason you see this drosha is we're coming off the pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu had stated with regard to Korach. So, Dorash Rava. In Bria Yivra Hashem. As we mentioned just a moment ago, Moshe Rabbeinu was responding to the Korach insurrection, and essentially was saying that I'm going to show the population that Korach is not justified, that his rebellion is not legitimate, by the anticipated fact that Korach, is going to die, he and his men, an unusual death. As we said before, because if his death ends up being usual, normal, then my role as a leader and my decisions are not divinely ordained. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Im brio yivra Hashem." What does that mean? "Im brio gehenem mutov tiyeh." If and also, by the way, note that we have a Roman numeral numbering scheme that indicates that what we're saying now is going to be subject to change later on. So Moshe Rabbeinu at this point is claimed to have said that if purgatory has been created, then good. Im lav, and if it hasn't been created, Yivro Hashem, then let Hashem create it now. The Gemara asks, could it possibly be a matter of doubt in Moshe Rabbeinu's mind regarding whether or not Gehenim was created? On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei, a topic heading, Mosai Nivro Gehenim. When was Gehenim created? When was purgatory established? And we have a tat nosei, that means a subtopic heading, Zayin Dvorim, 7 things, Shenivru Kedem Shenivru Olam, that were created before the world was created. So the Gemara goes on to say, with a long question, how could Moshe Rabbeinu be in doubt as to when the timing of the creation of Gehenim, of purgatory? V'hatanya, Shiva Dvarim Nivru Kedem Shenivru Ha'olam. There are 7 things created before the creation of the world. Elohein, Torah, Utshuva, penitence, Gan Eden, Gehenim, Kisei HaKavod, the heavenly throne, Ubeis HaMikdash, and Ushmoi Shel Moshiach, and the name of the Moshiach. There are elements here of what do we mean by the Beis HaMikdash being created before the creation of the world. So these are ideas that are a bit esoteric for our purposes, but you have to understand that there's a physical Beis HaMikdash, and there's also a spiritual entity that is the basis of the physical Beis HaMikdash that would be built in the future in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. So there are phenomena that are of a spiritual nature that are alluded to over here, like the name of Moshiach. A name isn't just something you find in a phone book. A name represents the essence of whatever is being named. So these different phenomena were created, and as we underline, before the creation of the world. And you'll notice that we continue a numbering scheme which serves as sources for each one of the points mentioned here. But we're interested primarily in number 4, where we added a dashed underline as well, the issue of Gehenim and its time of creation. So now let's go through the Psukim. Torah Dechsiv. How do I know that Torah was created before the world? Hashem Koneni Reishis Darko. That is a reference to at the beginning. Reishis Darko, at the very beginning, even before the world. Elsewhere, there are Mamorei Chazal indicating that the Kodesh Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and thereby created the world. The Torah serving as a type of instruction manual. Of course, figuratively speaking. The philosophical significance of that, though, is profound. That contrary to a popular perception that the world has a myriad of different aspects to it, and Torah is one part of the world. To the contrary, the world is one small part that figures into the Torah. The Torah is far more expansive than the world itself. There's an interesting drasha in Maseches Eruvin that illustrates that idea concerning the Megillah Ofa Ba'avir, for those who may be familiar. Number 2, Tshuva was penitence created before the world. Dichtiv B'terem. Terem means before, but terem horim yuladu vatchoila v'chulei toshev enosh ad dako. Toshev is a reference to tshuva. So before the physical world was created, the concept of penitence already came into existence. It's a little reminiscent of the idea of the Kodesh Baruch Hu creates the trufa, the medicine, before the makkah, before the disease. And that just reminds me, by the way, of something that I heard in the name of one of the Gedolei Yisrael, one of the great Jewish leaders of the previous generation, who said that the concept of the Kodesh Baruch Hu creates the trufa, the medicine, before he imposes the makkah, which is illustrated like in the story of Purim. Esther was appointed queen before the entire Purim issue of Haman and the impending destruction, chas v'shalom, of Jewish people ever came to be. So that the means of salvation, like in this case tshuva, is penitence, which enables the mankind to persevere on even after sinning, and hence the world can continue. So before sin, even before man sinning, already the means of getting out of it, of recuperation, namely tshuva, was created. And the reference to the Adam Godol that I was mentioning is that when we have some very severe diseases that we're all familiar with, that we don't need to itemize by name, realize that the cure is already here. It's just that man's eyes have not discovered it. The cure is there, but it's covered, so to speak, so that the real tefillah that one should pray when confronted with these diseases is that may the Almighty reveal to us, allow us to notice, to discover. The word discover, from the word, you have the word cover, and discover, to remove the cover. Doesn't mean to create something new. The solution is already here. We just have to pray for it to be revealed. And the significance of that is that it reduces, we'll say, it might reduce psychologically at least the quandary that we find ourselves in when dealing with the diseases. As someone might say, well, who will ever create the cure for this? It's not a function of creating the cure. It's a function of discovering, of revealing where the cure, which already exists, is found. And that, you can imagine, I think, would help to maybe accentuate the centrality of prayer with regard to these matters. We continue in the Gemara, number 3, Gan Eden, Dichtiv Vayita Hashem Elokim Gan Be'eden Mikedem. Mikedem can mean before, that before the world was created, so Gan Eden was already created. Which, by the way, shows a certain aspect of Gan Eden. As we said before, there's a spiritual aspect of it, beyond the physical trees that are featured in the basic storyline that concerns Gan Eden. There's an aspect of it that precedes the physical creation of trees, as you can see right here. Number 4, Gehenem Dechtiv Ki Aruch Me'etmul Tofteh. And the Rosh deals with this, the word Tofteh, besides the word Etmul, which means from before the world was created, Tofteh was already created, and that is, the Rosh says, Hainu Gehenem, Tofteh is Gehenem. Now, what's the connection between the word Tofteh and purgatory? Shekala Mispate B'Yisrael, anyone all who yield to their evil inclination, Noifeil Sham. So the word Tofteh has as its root one who is mitpateh. Mitpateh is one who succumbs to his evil inclination. And as a result, Tofteh is the place to purge one of those sins. Kisei HaKavod, Dichtiv Nochon Kisecha Me'oz, that the heavenly throne was there from Me'oz, from before the world. Beis HaMikdash Dichtiv Kisei Kavod Moron Me'rishon. That pasuk is a reference to the Beis HaMikdash, Me'rishon, meaning from even before the creation of the world. Shmoi Shel Moshiach Dichtiv Yehi Shmoi Li'olam. that's the end of the long question. And just to again reiterate, how can Moshe Rabbeinu, when dealing with Korach, deliberate whether or not Gehenna has already been created when it's clear that it was created before the world? Ela hachi komar. Here we are at stage 2. What Moshe Rabbeinu was saying is, ivri le puma mutav. If it's the entrance to Gehenna has been created, then good. V'im lo, if it hasn't been created, then yivro Hashem. Let Hashem create from anew, a mouth and entrance to Gehenna. The Gemara asks, how can that be the subject of deliberation? V'hoksiv ein kol chodesh tachas hashemesh. That once the world was created, nothing new is going to be created. That tachas hashemesh meaning under the sun. Once the heavens and the earth have been created, no new things are created. So how can this be an option? So we come to number 3, hachi komar. Hacha lo mikrav puma, la hacha likrav. The mouth, the entrance to Gehenna has been created, but where is it located? So if it's not near this location where Korach and his men are located, so let it be moved to this location. So moving that which already exists is not a contradiction to the idea of Ein Kol Chodosh Tachas HaShemesh. So Moshe Rabbeinu was praying that let the entrance of purgatory be moved to under the feet of Korach and his men. The Gemara continues. Dorash Rava, the Amri Lam Reb Yitzchak. Rava, in some versions have Reb Yitzchak saying, Mai dichtiv shemesh yareach omad zvula. The word zvula or zvul is a reference to one of the heavens, one of the high heavens. Again, we're dealing with an esoteric and spiritual concept. The Gemara in Maseches Chagiga, if I'm not mistaken, makes reference to 7 different levels of heaven. The Ran makes reference to the Gemara in the second parak of Chagiga, and what is present in each one of those different heavens is delineated. But what is the problem here? We have a pasuk describing the sun and the moon in Zvul. Shemesh v'yorech b'Zvul mai bayon v'hal b'rakia kavi. What is the sun and moon doing in the Zvul high level heaven when they are established in the Rokia, which is lower than Zvul? Different names of heavens, as we mentioned before. In English, by the way, there's a saying when one wants to express that he feels good. He says, I feel like I'm in 7th heaven. Well, that phrase doesn't just come from nowhere. So what do we see here? We have a problem with the pasuk. The Gemara answers, if you want to understand what Shemesh and Yoreach are doing in Zvul, Melamed, this pasuk teaches us, Sha'alu, Shemesh v'Yoreach mirakil Zvul. These entities, and again, we're not necessarily dealing with the physical spheres of the sun and the moon, but rather there's a spiritual entity that stands at their respective roots. So this entity went from Rokia to Zvul, the Omru Lefonov, and they said to the Almighty, Ribono Shel Olam, Im ata oiseh din leben Amram, onu meirim. If you stand in defense of Moshe Rabbeinu against Korach and his men, then we will shine forth. V'im lav, if you allow Moshe Rabbeinu to be dismissed, to be defeated, then Ein onu meirin, then we are not going to shine forth. So the Shemesh and Yoreach are basically threatening, they're stating an ultimatum to the Almighty. Well, the Shah, Yora, Bohen Chitzin, V'chanisas, at that point, arrows and spears were shot at them. Omar Lohem, the Almighty says to the Shemesh and Yoreach, B'chol yoyim v'yoyim mishtachavim lochem, v'atem irim. Every day, as we're only too familiar, there are idol worshippers. And amongst the different sources that people choose to worship, you find the sun and the moon. So there are every day people bowing down, the sun worshippers, the moon worshippers, and that doesn't seem to bother you. And you shine forth. B'chvodi lo mechisem, b'chvod boser v'dom mechisem. When it comes to my honor, that doesn't bother you. Lo mechisem, you don't protest. But when it comes to the honor of a human being, as great as he may be, then you do protest. So this was the Almighty's response to them. And with this story, though, the pasuk of Shemesh Yoreach Amad B'Zvula, we now have come to understand. The Gemara says, "Uvechol yoyim v'yoyim yorin b'hen chitzim v'chanisos u'meirin," that which we said that every day they shine forth only as a result of the shooting of arrows and spears in their direction, do they now shine forth? And this, of course, was a result of the Almighty's objection to their claims. So how do we see this? That only as a result now they receive this eternal or unending punishment, that they are shot incessantly with spears and arrows. Shnemar, the pasuk says, "Lior chitzecha yahalechu lenoiga brak chanisecha." So you have in this pasuk a reference to the chitzim and chanisos, the arrows and spears, being the motivating element for them to laor, and noga are different words indicating light. Tanya, Bikur Cholim Ein Lo Shiur. Here we have a Tanaic source. Translated, the visiting of the sick has no amount. My Ein Lo Shiur. What do you mean that it has no amount? And now you can see a marking scheme using triangles on the side of the Gemara under the Nosei Mivneh heading. You see a triangle feature. Gimel Hesberim, 3 explanations. Al-Hadikatani Bikur Cholim Ein Lo Shiur. What was meant by that Tanaic source? So Sovar Rav Yosef Lememar. Sovar means he thought to say. This is an initial thinking which will be dismissed, though. So Rav Yosef thought to say Ein Shiur Lamatan Schora, that there is no limit to the amount of reward one could receive for Bikur Cholim. Omar le Abaye v'chol mitzvahs mi yesh shiur lamatan schar, and all other mitzvahs, is there a quantifiable amount of reward for them? V'ha'atanan, have we not learned in a Mishnah from Maseches Avos, have a zoyer b'mitzvah kala kivachamura, one should be diligent in the performance of what people perceive as light mitzvahs, as diligent as they are with what are perceived as the serious mitzvahs. Shel mitzvahs. You don't know how reward is allocated for mitzvahs. So to suggest that that Bikur Cholim specifically is a mitzvah with unlimited, unfathomable reward, that isn't. It's not accurate to focus that statement at Bikur Cholim when the same really applies to all mitzvahs. Elo Omar Abaye, Afilu Godoil Eitzel Koton. Rashi, toward the last third of the Rashi commentary, Afilu Godol Eitzel Koton Shelo Yoimar. A person should not say Lo Avaker Elo Godol Kamoni. I'm not going to visit a person who's sick other than if he is of the same status as I am. So the concept of shiur has to do with quantity as is measured by one's status. So ein lo shiur. It doesn't. It's not a mitzvah that is bound by status considerations, and as a result, even someone of, let's say, a high level, a lofty status, is expected to visit someone that isn't at that level. And that, as Rashi says, there is a mitzvah to visit the insignificant no less than it is a mitzvah to visit those who are significant. The Gemara continues, Rava Omar Afilu Mea Pa'omim Biyom. Ein lo shiur means even if it's 100 times in a given day. Omar Rav Acha Bar Chanina Kol Mavakir Chilu Noitil Echad Mishishim Mechol Yo. One who visits the sick, he removes 1/60th of his ailment. Amri lei, so they ask Rav Acha im kain le arun shisin velukmua. Then let 60 people go in, and that will result in his recuperation. Lukmua means and cause him to get up from his sick bed. Omar lei. So Rav Acha explains this idea of 1/60th is Ke'i Suraisa Debei Rebbe. This expression will be explained shortly in the Gemara with an example. Isuraisa has to do literally with 1/10 of one's property, but that's a borrowed idea in this context. And Ubeben Gilo, the Rashi says, Bahur Kamoso Zokein Lozokein, meaning the visitor would have to be of the same age. If it's a young person that's sick, so we're talking about young people going to visit. If it's an elderly individual that is infirmed, so we're talking about people of that age bracket going to visit him. The Ran says, one of our previous shurim we spoke at length about, or we referred at length to the topic of the mazolos, the different constellations and the horoscope. And we also mentioned, we cautioned that when we refer to horoscope, we're not talking about a common, a newspaper column, but rather something we'll say more authentic, more deeply rooted in Jewish tradition. So it would have to be, according to the Ran, be that the one who's visiting is born under the same mazal as the person who is infirmed. Desanya. Now we'll dwell on this issue of the calculation. We said that a person who visits removes 1/60th, so it's to be understood in such a way that 60 people visiting is not going to result in the person's getting better. What's this Isuraiso de Be Rebbe? Desanya. Rebbe Oimer. Bas hanizonis mnichse ochin. A father of children died. He left sons and daughters. So a daughter who is being supported by virtue of the rules of Ksuba by the estate that was inherited by her brothers in traditional Jewish law. As far as strict laws of inheritance are concerned, the sons inherit, daughters do not inherit. That's by way of the strict Torah law. There are rabbinic provisions that enable a daughter to receive support as a daughter of that family and in anticipation of her marriage, her subsequent marriage. So a girl who is being supported from the estate that was inherited by her brothers, Noitelis Isur Nechasim. Before her marriage, she's entitled to get 1/10 of the estate. Amru lo l'Rebbe. So upon hearing this, the rabbi said to Rebbe, Lidvorecha, according to you, Mishi yeshlo eser bonus ben, a man who died, leaving 10 daughters and 1 son, ein lo laben b'mokom bonus klum. The result would be that the son gets nothing, and the Torah provides for the son to be the heir. How can that be, that the son will get nothing? If you say each daughter gets 1/10 of the estate, so the son is totally cut out. Omar Lohen. So Rebbe explained, Rishayna Neitelis Isur Nechasim. The first of the 10 daughters that comes to get married, so she'll take 1/10 of the property. Shniya b'ma shishayra. The second one takes 1/10 of that which remains. In other words, if you had, just to use simple round numbers, if you had
property worth $100. So the first daughter would then be entitled to $10. That leaves $90 in terms of the value of the estate. The second daughter, she doesn't get a tenth that's the same as what the first daughter took, but rather she would get a tenth of that which remains after the first daughter took. So she would be taking 9. And shlishis, bameh, shishayra, and the third daughter would be taking a tenth of what remained after the second daughter took. So, in our example, after the second daughter took, there would have remained $81 of estate. So the third daughter would be entitled to $8.1. According to Rashi, the continuation of this represents a different scenario. It says, "V'chozros v'cholkos b'shoveh." This is a different scenario, but using the same concept. In the event that you have 10 daughters all coming to get married at the same time, so then it wouldn't be fair for one daughter to get $10 and the other daughter get $9 and the other 8.1. Who's to choose whom? So the division of the estate would be using the same type of calculation that you would have the 10 daughters all getting married at once. You'd have to calculate it that one would receive, as we said, 10, the other 9, the other 8.1. But then, before the money is actually deposited in their respective accounts, all of that amount, you have to add up 10 plus 9 plus 8.1, and down the line, you add up all that money, and then divide it into 10 equal parts. That's v'chozros v'cholkos b'shoveh. But at the end of the day, when all the dust clears, the son, though, is still left with an inheritance. Might be significantly reduced from the point of the father's departure, but nevertheless, not as the Rabbanon thought that the son would be left with nothing. Not true. The son does have an aspect of inheritance which has significance in that we're able to at least manifest and fulfill an aspect of what the Torah originally intended, that this son is the heir. We continue with a story involving illness. Rav Chelbo Cholash, Rav Chelbo took ill. Nofak Rav Kahana Achriz. Rav Kahana came forth and he announced. We continue at the top of Mem Omer Aleph. Rav Chelbo Boish. Rav Chelbo Boish means took ill. Rav Chelbo has become ill. Lo Ika de Kasi, and no one came. Omar Lahu. So he then announced, and here we have a point that's going to last a number of lines. Rav Kahana then announced, Lo kachoya maise betalmid echad mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva. Was there not once a story involving one student of the students of Rabbi Akiva, shechala, that took ill? Lo nichnesu chachamim levakro. And the scholars did not come to visit him. V'nichnas Rabbi Akiva levakro, and Rabbi Akiva he went to visit his student. Ubishvil shekibdo v'ribso lefanov choya, and because of the care that Rabbi Akiva demonstrated to the student, namely he swept the floor, he washed it down, creating a more healthful, sanitary environment, so the student lived. Or Omar Le, the student said to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Hachiseni, you've enabled me to live. Yotzer Rabbi Akiva v'darash, and upon hearing that, Rabbi Akiva went forth and proclaimed, Kol mi she'ein mevaker cholim ki'ilu shofech domim. All those who do not visit the sick, it's tantamount, it's like shedding blood. The Rashi at the top line says, Ki'ilu shofech domim b'pnei shebnei adam shenichnosim levaker oisim le'luchelu kol tzrocha, because those who do visit, they take care of the needs of the sick person. And therefore you can infer that those who don't, who leave him without his needs cared for, so he dies. The topic of Bikur Cholim continues, as we mentioned at the outset. We continue Daf Mem Aleph. So we will pause at this point in the middle of this long discussion. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.